Good morning, y'all. I wanted to talk to you for a little bit out of the book of Exodus, where I've kind of made my way in reading the Bible. And, I grew up in church, though I was not a Christian growing up. And so as a little kid, you hear the story of Moses and the parting of the Red Sea and his exodus from Egypt. You hear that story all the time. And so the story of the burning bush is not an unfamiliar story to me. But as I was reading this morning, I couldn't help but notice some things and think about the context of my own life that I had not considered before. So if you know anything about Moses, background on Moses is that Moses was born into Egypt as a Hebrew, at a time when Joseph was there and he brought the Hebrews into Egypt. They just enjoyed just a plethora of blessing. The Pharaoh was super gracious to them. They gave them this land called Goshen and gave them a place to like spread out and grow. And that's exactly what they did. They multiplied. And then that Pharaoh died and Joseph died. And the next Pharaoh came and didn't know anything of Joseph. And so had no real affection or affinity for the Hebrews, and so began to enslave them. In their enslavement, he then began to see that they were growing anyway. Like his enslavement produced more children. That's a whole nother theme that I think is just the reality of Christianity under persecution. Go ahead and persecute us. We're going to grow anyway. But the point is that essentially what happened is he decided, the Pharaoh did, that he was going to stop the growth of the Hebrews by killing all the male boys. So as soon as they were born, the midwife was going to hand them over to the Egyptians, and they were either going to throw them in the river or kill them one way or the other. I think the specifics was throw them in the Nile. So obviously the Hebrew wives weren't okay with that and started to have their children anyway and hide their men. They were using the midwives would not. I love that story. They said they would not, for fear of the Lord, follow through on what Pharaoh does. So if you're looking for a pretty pertinent idea, they pushed back on something that the government was doing for fear of the Lord, because the Lord's desire for their life trumped what the government was doing. And so anyway, that's what they did. And Moses was one of those boys. So he was born, and Moses' mom put him in a basket and floated him down the river to try and save his life. And he was picked up by the Pharaoh's household and raised in the Pharaoh's household. Pharaoh's daughter actually sort of grabbed him and then used a Hebrew woman, his mom, to raise him. So he got raised by his mom in the Pharaoh's household, which is, if that isn't the sovereignty of God, that's kind of neat. But the story picks up in Exodus 3. What happened was as a member of the Pharaoh's household, he was sort of privy to all things, and he saw a Egyptian beating up a Hebrew, and he didn't like it, and so he killed the Hebrew. Well, that news kind of got out, and for fear of himself being killed or punished, he fled to Midian. And while he was in Midian, he was out shepherding the flock, being a shepherd and taking care of the sheep. And he runs across this burning bush, and this burning bush starts talking to him. It says this burning, it was not consumed. So the Lord was talking to him through this burning bush. And in this burning bush, he says this, and this is verse 9. He says, and now behold, this is God speaking, chapter 3, verse 9. Now behold, the cry of the people of Israel has come to me. And I have also seen the oppression in which the Egyptians oppress them. So God hears the cries of his people, and he's responding. Such a huge encouragement for you and me. He hears our prayers and acts, right? Our prayers do actually do something. They're heard and they cause action. Come and I will send you to Pharaoh that you may bring my people, the people of Israel, out of Egypt. So he says this to Moses, I'm going to send you to Pharaoh in Egypt, and you're going to bring God's people, my people, out of Egypt. And then I love and I struggle with his response. He says, but Moses said to God, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the children of Israel out of Egypt? So immediately Moses questions God. Why me? Of all people in the world, why send me? And I think that's kind of funny from where we sit, right? Like Moses was born in the Pharaoh's household. He knew the Egyptian language and could speak it. He was super familiar with Egyptian culture, especially the Egyptian royal household and what would get them to work on the part of the Lord, how to interact with that. He was overly familiar with that culture, and he had a connection to the royal household. Like from where I'm sitting, like there's nobody else more qualified than him. There's nobody in the world more qualified for God to send than Moses. And Moses' thought was, man, why me? Like, of all people, why me? Moses' insecurities here are pressing him from fulfilling the purpose God has for him. And if that's not a statement that doesn't resonate in your heart today, it resonates in mine, that my insecurities, the things that I don't feel confident in, that I can't trust the Lord with, are keeping me from fulfilling the very purpose that the Lord may have for me, right? Here's what's going through Moses' mind. Is like, man, I just killed somebody in that country. I killed an Egyptian. As soon as I go back, it's over for me, right? He's letting one mistake, which sure enough, it was a mistake, a sin, prevent him from believing and trusting in the immense ability and the sovereignty of God. And so therefore is not fulfilling what God is calling him to do, or at least pressing back on what God is calling him to do because of an insecurity. I think this is a message to so many Christians today. Like, we're gonna mess up. We're gonna do things wrong. We're going to sin. But that is not grounds for us to not do the things God is calling us to. If God calls us, I heard this phrase growing up, if God calls us to it, he'll walk us through it, or something like that. If God calls you to it, look at verse 12. God said, I will be with you, and this shall be the sign for that I have sent for you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you shall serve God on this mountain. I will be with you. That's what God says back to Moses. And as I'm reading this, I couldn't help but be challenged by God's response to Moses' insecurities. I'll be with you. And so as I think and consider this idea, I want y'all to think and consider this idea that, man, don't let Satan use a fear or an insecurity or a past mistake to keep you from fulfilling the purpose that God is calling you to. Don't. Satan will use everything, even a right and good conviction for sin. He'll use that conviction to say, hey man, you're not good enough for that. Like, you're not the right person to do that. God's got somebody better for that. Maybe God doesn't want you to share the gospel with those people. You're not good enough for that. Or Satan will say, hey, remember that mistake you made? Yeah, you can't do that. You can't go fill that job and do the work of ministry there. You're not qualified for that because of that mistake. Satan will get in your ear and have you believe lies and truths that don't exist. He'll have you caught up on your mistakes and your sin, and he'll preach this nasty, deceptive language of incapability. And God's going to say, no, and I'll be with you. I'm not asking you to be the hero. I'm just asking you to represent the hero, Christ. So I know that I'm kind of rambling, but that's such a huge challenge for me to believe that, man, Spencer, your past mistakes, your past disqualifications, like the things that you've done are covered by the grace of God through the cross. And Satan would love to use those in my life to keep me from doing things for God's glory. But verse 12 is a verse I can rest in. But he said, I will be with you. But I hope that's an encouragement to y'all this morning. Don't let the lies and the deceptions and the insecurities provided by Satan be grounds for not trusting that God will be with you. Go do the work of the gospel for the glory of God, despite what has happened in your past, and make much of the Lord in the process. He will be with you. Love you guys.